Thank you, Andrew, for being with us in these interviews and for participating in the project of the 100 years of Stafford Beer. Your participation is very welcome and very important for us. We are very proud of the way that you have portrayed and researched Stafford among all the other big British cyberneticians. And I think that this is very important for the cybernetic community to understand a little bit more your points of view. So thank you for being with us. There's a couple of questions that we would like to hear from you. The first one is, how did you know about the Stafford and his ideas?
Well, the first thing to say is that I'm an academic, emeritus professor in Exeter. So my interest in Stafford Beer is a kind of academic interest. Like probably the only person in the world, the only academic who's kind of interested in Stafford from that angle, apart from organization people and people who are interested in the politics of Project Cybersyn. I'm interested in Beer, his whole life and his work and his contributions to cybernetics. My field is history and philosophy of science. I started off writing about the history of particle physics years ago, but quite a long time ago I got interested in cybernetics. It seemed like a kind of mysterious, enigmatic, interesting field that I should know more about. Um, and after looking into it in great length, I wrote a very long book about the history of cybernetics in Britain, which is called The Cybernetic Brain, Sketches of Another Future, which includes a very long chapter on Stafford Beer. It's like 100 pages long, based on his writings, the literature about his work in cybernetics in general. I had a couple of very long telephone calls with Stafford when he was alive, and some very interesting and productive discussions with Elena Leonard and his daughter Vanilla Beer. I tried many times to actually meet Stafford in the flesh, and he was quite happy to do that, but it never quite worked out. When I was in America, he was in Wales. When he was in Toronto, I was back in England. I finally thought I'd just go and try and see him, but it was towards the end of his life. I went up to Toronto and he was in hospital and he was unconscious. And so I managed to be in his presence, but we never talked in the flesh.
Yep. It's a pity. It's a pity because he was an amazing character. Yes. But I can see that even without meeting him personally, you did grasp enormously clear his spirit and his mind.
Yeah, I mean, I became fascinated by his work. I found it difficult to understand at the beginning. I don't think his writings are terribly easy to read, but it was obvious there was something fascinating there. I suppose my interest in cybernetics was twofold. It is twofold. One is the kind of ontology of cybernetics, its view of what the world is like. Um, what I got from Stafford was the idea that the world is in the end, a kind of unknowable place, which we have to explore and try to get to grips with, but we never get to the bottom of it, which was my own kind of ontological vision coming from my earlier work. But what interests me especially about the cyberneticians is that they actually put this vision of the world into practice. They acted it out, lived it in all sorts of practical projects. And especially, of course, in Stafford's case, he lived out cybernetics in his work on organizations and management. So I really wanted to get to grips with how he did it. What is practice as a cybernetician look like? Uh, of course, I got interested then in all the other aspects of his work. He lived out this kind of cybernetic vision in all sorts of different ways. The arts, painting, critique of geopolitics, spirituality. So the more I found out about him, the more I wanted to know in a kind of circle. That's why I ended up writing so much about him, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. Thank you, Andrew. Absolutely wonderful. So let's talk about his contributions. What do you think that were his most important contributions to science?
I think his most important contribution was basically to expand the range of cybernetics, to take it to places it hadn't been to before. So if you look at the first generation of cybernetics, especially in Britain, also in America, it kind of grew out of psychiatry. It was a kind of brain science in the work of people like Ross Ashby, Gray Walter, Warren McCulloch in the States. The first generation of cyberneticians wanted to understand the brain. And what Stafford did, I think, was to kind of turn that, stand that project on its head. Standing the brain on its head is a bit of a mixed metaphor, but to invert the thing, instead of trying to understand the brain, um, and cybernetics understood the brain as a kind of organ of adaptation.
Yes.
The brain is what helps us get along in situations that we haven't encountered before.
Yes.
It's the brain. The brain deals with the unknowable, if you like. And to stand that on its head, what Stafford said was, if the brain is the organ of adaptation, then any adaptive system is a brain in some sense. Um, in the 1950s, Stafford was working in organizations and management, thinking about what people called in those days the automatic factory, a factory without workers. And Beer's great contribution was to say, well, that's great, but this automatic factory needs a brain, something to help it, adapt to all the fluctuations of the world it's situated in. And his idea was to try and find some adaptive system which could function as a brain for the factory. And this, of course, is what led into his famous experimentation with biological systems, leading up to his fascination with ponds, right? Pond ecosystem is a kind of an adaptive thing. When the environment changes, the balance of species changes to adapt to that in a flexible and creative fashion. And Stafford reckoned that's the kind of thing that the factory needed. So the ambition of the biological computing project, which he carried on in collaboration with Gordon Pask, another famous second generation cybernetician. The ambition was to harness some naturally occurring adaptive system to the management of the factory. An amazing, incredible project, nobody could have got to that if they hadn't been already thinking about the brain, adaptation, and unknowable world. As we all know, the biological computing project basically came to an end in the early 1960s. We don't have factories managed by brains, by ponds. But if followed on any kind of point of principle, it was a great idea. The trouble was trying to get ponds to care about us. How could you translate the variables characterizing a factory, say, into a pond and then read out its reactions um, to control the behavior of the factory? Um,
sorry to interrupt, but this idea, I think that many people don't know very much the anecdote about the biological computer and these experiments between Stafford and Gordon Pask. Would you tell us just a little summary of how, of what you know, how you understand this? How did that happen? This experiment.
Um, well, the world is full of complex biological adaptive systems that are capable of kind of managing their relation with the environment, whatever it is, much better than we could ever do consciously. So, my body and your body, controlling the internal temperature to within of our bodies, to within rather tight temperature range. If you had to think about how to do that, you'd go mad or you'd fail and you just die. But these adaptive systems can somehow do that. Um, Beer and Pask's idea was that somehow the factory is a viable quasi-organic system, needs that kind of adaptive control system to cope with the fluctuations of its economic environment, the input of materials and money and what the customers are doing, without having to kind of calculate every single move. So the idea was if you could get one of these adaptive and homeostatic systems um, to somehow couple itself to the factory, like our internal homeostatic systems were, then you could, as I've said many times, pull out the human managers, plug in a pond or something like that, and the pond would ideally maintain the viability of the farm or the organization.
So in that respect, we can say that he and Bonferser were really 50 years ahead of the time because even nowadays we haven't been able to to invent yet a biological computer, isn't it? We are still
Yeah,
the
yeah, you're right. I mean, I think people these days do much simpler kind of things with networks of neurons and stuff like that. But the cybernetics in the 50s and 60s was the source of many incredibly ambitious projects.
yes, yes, absolutely.
The cyberneticians like Stafford Beer seem to have so much more imagination
Yes.
than than people do these days. I mean, I think about Pask and interactive architecture and buildings that reconfigure themselves around people. Something like interactive architecture is kind of popular still these days, but nowhere near the kinds of things that Pask was imagining in his 60s. That, that,
In our community, we do say that he was 50 years ahead of his time, and he himself said that to us, to the close friends, that he knew that it would take at least 50 years for people to understand what he was talking about.
yeah, well,
And nowadays,
maybe.
nowadays people are beginning to understand because I mean all the new ideas on complexity theory, quantum physics, all the new developments in cybernetics themselves, in second order cybernetics, and are now providing a context in which everything start to make more sense. And things like the variable system modular is becoming more and more popular, and people are finally coming to grasp to understand why this could be an insightful theory, very practical as well, as you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember he once said to me that I asked him what he thought about complexity theory, and he said, these people are reinventing the wheel. But, I'm not sure if he was quite right, actually. Complexity theory is a very rich structure. I don't think Stafford, you know,
No.
with
I,
all those things.
yeah, I think that the first mathematicians had the basis that are still very useful, and for later complexity theories, they were the very same basis talking about self organization and networks and all that the first mathematicians postulated and developed. But of course, there have been very important developments in complexity sciences in the last 30 years that have enriched enormously the panorama that when Stafford was alive were not there. No?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's right. And also, I mean, a lot of complexity theory is about the inner workings of this complex system or that, and how they kind of combine to produce new levels of behavior and such thing. And I don't think Stafford was interested in that, right? He was much more interested in how complex systems perform, how they act, how we can relate to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and he
you know,
works in organizations. I mean, all his work is about the complexity management in organizations, small, medium, large, nation, states, whatever, but very focused in organizations. No?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know more about that than I do, so
Okay, well, Andrew, this has been really, really nice. I don't know if you want to do any final comments about the stuff or his contribution, or
well, I mean, it might be worth saying that I started looking at Stafford's work a long time ago now, from this perspective of trying to understand cybernetics in a kind of technical way. And of course, in Stafford's work, that leads through biological computing to the viable system model, which is again a version of this kind of brain image coming down from Ashby and Grey Walton, and then to the team's integrity, the idea of adaptive couplings between the different levels of the VSM. One thing that I wish I knew more about was that I know Stafford became interested in autopoiesis, this idea of uh, Maturana and Varela, that biological organisms are continually producing themselves into the future. And obviously, organizations have that kind of autopoietic quality. So that's the kind of technical aspects of his cybernetics. And what I realized as I carried on looking at Stafford's work was that there's much more to his life and work than the technical contents of cybernetics that I've been focusing on. So and I've always been struck by his kind of critique of geopolitics and his reaction to 9/11, which seemed to be completely right, that you can't mm, exert a kind of hierarchical control over the enemy, which was Al Qaeda in those days. Then they're always going to escape your control because they have more variety than you do, which is, the story that's now played out for the last 25 years leading up to the Americans bombing Iran. They
inside.
just can't control world history like. And I thought I liked the way he put that. And he was also an artist, a painter. I was fascinated to discover that, poet. Um, and of course, he was fascinated by Eastern philosophy, which, well, I've always been interested in, but it was extremely interesting to me to see how this interest in the East was engaged with his cybernetics, the, the cybernetics of management and Eastern spirituality somehow managed to be kind of continuous versions of each other in his work. Although, right, um, for a long time, he seemed to have kept that secret. So there's his technical writings over here, and maybe his friends and relatives knew about his spirituality. But then, after Project Cybersyn, after it failed, the Pinochet coup, it, it's it seemed to me that beer had had it with kind of conventional ways of going on in the world.
Yes,
Seemed like some kind of disgust came over him.
yes,
he said, I'm fed up with hiding myself from the world. And then the kind of Eastern elements in his work and thought and life started to appear in his
Yes.
published writing.
Yes.
And at the same time, it started to play such an important part in his life. It was after Cybersyn he went to live in his famous primitive cottage in Wales, where apparently he taught tantric yoga, that's which he kind of wrote about in this funny unpublished book called The Chronicles of Wizard Crime.
Yes.
So, I mean, he just started to seem to me to be such a wonderfully rich and interesting, unconventional guy, breaking down the divisions between his inner life and his management consultancy. Uh, I did this- I had the idea he was one of these people who only sleep for like 4 hours a night. I don't know if you've heard that story. I don't know if
Oh,
it's
yes, no, no, he told me because I was with him many times in the cottage and I did learned tantric yoga with him and he introduced me to these practices of spirituality and meditation and he used to say to me that he only needed to sleep 5 hours and then he would do 3 hours of yoga meditation before starting working again. So it was part of his, he was convinced that through meditation and yoga, he will his body, his physiology will reconstitute itself and he will be ready to continue for
yeah,
his rhythm. Yes.
yeah. I mean, I've only ever known a couple of people who could get by on a few hours sleep a night, and they've all been these incredible individuals, and very productive
Yes.
in a rich sense, not
Yes.
just kind of quantitative efficiency, but
Yeah. And what you said about his change after Chile, we were interviewing Vanilla Beer for the
yeah,
documentary, and we found a letter that he wrote to his friends and his family on his 50th birthday after 1975 after Chile, and in that letter he makes the statement that he's going to transform his life and he has enough of being a consultant and traveling the world and we wanted really to concentrate on his spirituality, on developing his ideas and writing and communicating to the world in his own way, without any kind of constraints or restrictions. So it was very intentional. That's when he sold his car and his fortune
yeah,
and started just writing and interacting with the people that he wanted to, but avoiding any political commitments, any economic commitments that will distract him from his purpose. He was very well focused, very spiritual, and that was the time of major productivity when he wrote all the books and when he really started to become more well known to his work, but very silently, very modestly, and in a very interesting way, very spiritual. Mm.
and I mean, I would love to see that letter. If
Yes, I will share it with you.
send me a copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think there were two stories he told me. One was being basically disgusted about the way that the cyber sign, well, disgusted by the Pinochet coup and the CIA and so. But then, but his other story was that he said something like, "I looked at my life. I'd had two wives. I can't remember 6 children or 8 children, a
Yes.
Rolls Royce, a big house in Surrey. I, I thought about it. Is that what I want? And that was also part of changing his life. I think.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, that's just yeah. So
Yeah, he had an enormous impact from the Chilean project and the coup and he felt very responsible that he couldn't complete the project and very sad to see some of the people that were with him so passionately being suffering and the whole country suffering from the coup and that changed his opinion and his desire just he decided he didn't want to continue being a consultant or making money. He had too much to say, not much more time left, and he wanted to focus on saying it very clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I guess his first book after the Chile project was A Platform for Change, A Message from Stafford Beer, which is also a book that, fascinated me. It's printed on paper of, 5 different colors, I think, red, yellow, orange, green, brown. And I think it's at the beginning of that book, you said, I'd arranged to give, I don't know, 5 big talks in the coming year, and I decided I was going to make them count. I was going to lay out, the program that Stafford Beer thought was important.
Yeah.
So you kind of self-consciously
Yeah.
take charge of and kind of remake your life in
Exactly.
that kind of way. It's
Exactly.
a tremendously impressive thing to do.
Yeah. It's, uh,
Maybe I'll this afternoon,
yeah,
sort of.
yeah, very interesting because I mean he was very famous, very rich, very well known, and
Mm.
everything. And he decided he didn't want any material gains. He didn't want any political commitments. He didn't want any. He wanted just a free space for him to do what he needed to do, to say what he needed to say, and he did it. I mean, amazingly, when passed away, he managed to complete a lot, I mean, most of his writes and publications, and also to create a community of people around him that were very, very, very much in love with him and respectful of him. And all of us, his students and friends, he had enormous influence in us. Most of us have spent the rest of our lives trying to follow his steps and to make sure that other people also know about him because he was such an extraordinary person.
Yes, yes. I mean, that seems to be a kind of continuous aspect of his life. So, I mean, even before Chile, he was kind of incredibly socially important to the cybernetics community. He seems to have known everybody. He kind of held the community together. He was one of the very few people who had actually managed to think about how is cybernetics going to propagate itself. What's the social basis going to be? Where's the next generation going to come from?
Yes.
And I mean, as you just said, he did it through his personal influence on people, but I mean, he also was central to setting up the cybernetics department in Brunel
Yes.
and getting Gordon Pask a job, where Pask then trained the third generation of British cybernetician.
Yes. Yes.
So, apart from personally and spiritually,
Oh, yeah.
he was also socially. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, and the work that he did in Manchester Business School and in Liverpool, John Moores University, in Sunderland University. No, I mean, he did have a network of universities and people, and the Operational Research Society, where he was president, and the World Organization of Systems and Cybernetics. I mean, he had all the accolades that you can imagine. He continue in all this job of disseminating, clarifying cybernetics, and pushing the boundaries of cybernetics into management. And so he continued very engaged in that respect. He didn't stop that, but he just didn't stop the ambition of being a famous consultant. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, he was a big man. Somehow that seems to be a good description. Although I don't know if he was a big man. How
He was a big man, yes.
what they
Yeah.
physically? No.
Very, very impressive, very impressive. He was very tall with a big beard and very, very big forehead. And he had a presence that was very impressive when you see him. He was, I mean, really strong personality and very warm personality, very humble. With the amount of fame and prestige that he had, he was always humble. He always talked to people from whatever social strata, whatever condition, with love and affection. Always listen to people, you know. The only thing he didn't have was the arrogance of many scientists that sort of consider themselves in another level. He was amazingly simple character, very, very, very gentle and very, very strong, but very, very, very impressive character. Very impressive, very beautiful character. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I certainly got a feeling for that. The couple of times I had these long telephone calls with him,
Yes.
and I was just surprised how generous he was
Right.
talking to me. I mean, he didn't know who I was.
Yes. Yeah.
Some academic phoning him out of the blue, but we talked for a long time.
Yeah, that's a story that we have here in the interviews with everyone that is participating in the project. Those of us who met him or who approach him, we always have the same story. I called him, I told him who I was or what I was doing, and he immediately responded like engaging, giving time,
Yeah,
interested, no? Very, very, very humble and warm, very warm. Mm.
and
Yeah.
also an amazing amount of energy, right? It takes a lot of energy to be open to all these different kinds of people.
He does.
You know, I mean, like I remember he wrote up this long account of his first visit to America,
Yeah.
and it's just exhausting reading what he was doing. You know, he'd spend 2 days talking to Norbert Wiener, and then he'd zoom off to MIT and talk to somebody else. You know, no chance to sleep or anything. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that energy level is something worth thinking about. And anyway, maybe that's the other side of the yoga being kind of
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's
centered.
very centered, very focused,
Yeah, yeah.
very balanced with himself and his spirit and his body. Yeah. Well, Andy, this been really, really, really nice. Thank you very much.